If someone had told me a year ago that my wife would betray me in the most unthinkable way, I would have laughed in their face. If they had told me how it would happen, I would have called them insane. But here I am, sitting in an empty apartment, staring at the walls, trying to make sense of something that will never make sense. I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe I need to get it out. Maybe I need to see it in words to believe it really happened. Or maybe I just need someone to tell me that I'm not losing my mind. My wife, Audrey, and I had been married for 6 years. We met in college, and like every naive fool who falls in love young, I thought we had something real, something untouchable. She was smart, beautiful, and had this energy that pulled people toward her. She could charm anyone, and for years, I felt lucky to be the man she chose. But looking back now, I wonder if I was just another person she manipulated, just another pawn in whatever game she was always playing. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but whose is? There were fights, moments of distance, but nothing that ever seemed like a red flag. Or maybe I was just too blind to see them. Lately, though, things had changed. It started small late nights at work, excuses that didn't quite add up, a sudden obsession with her appearance. She had always cared about looking good, but this was different. New clothes, perfume I had never smelled on her before, a phone that was suddenly always locked and out of reach. I told myself I was overthinking it. That's what she wanted me to believe. She would laugh when I asked questions, roll her eyes, tell me I was being insecure. And I believed her. I let myself believe that I was imagining things because the alternative was too painful to accept. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday. I had planned to take Audrey out for dinner, to spend some time together, to reconnect. She had been distant, distracted, and I thought maybe all we needed was a night alone. But she had other plans. She told me she wasn't feeling well, that she just wanted to stay home and rest. So, I let it go. I ordered takeout instead, set up a movie, tried to make the best of it. She was restless, kept checking her phone, kept pacing the room like she was waiting for something. I asked her if everything was okay. She brushed me off, said she was just tired. Another lie. Another moment that should have set off alarms. But I ignored it. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. A crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps in our house. My heart pounded as I sat up, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. I glanced over at Audrey, but she wasn't in bed. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices. Low, hushed voices. And then laughter. Not the kind of laughter you make when you're scared. Not the kind of laughter you make when you're in danger. I got out of bed slowly, moving toward the noise, my hands shaking as I gripped the doorknob. I pushed the door open just enough to see into the hallway. The dim light from the living room spilled into the dark, casting long shadows. And there, standing in the middle of my home, was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, muscular, dressed in black from head to toe. He should have looked like a threat. He should have looked like someone who had broken in with bad intentions. But he didn't. He looked comfortable. At ease. Like he belonged there. And then I saw her, Audrey. Standing close to him, too close, her body language telling me everything I needed to know before I even processed what I was looking at. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't caught off guard. She wasn't a victim in this situation. She was part of it. I stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't some random break-in. This was planned. This was something that had been happening for who knows how long, and I had walked right into it. The man, this stranger, this robber, turned his head slightly, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly. He wasn't some masked intruder. He wasn't panicked or in a hurry to escape. He was grinning. And Audrey? She was smiling too, like none of this mattered. Like I didn't matter. And in that moment, standing in the hallway of the house I had worked so hard to build, watching my wife stand beside a man who had no business being there, I realized something. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something else entirely, and it was about to get so much worse that I stood frozen in the dim hallway, the air thick with something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just the gut-wrenching realization that my wife had been lying to me. It was something worse, something that made my stomach churn and my hands tremble. The man standing in my living room, the so-called intruder, wasn't just some random criminal. He wasn't some desperate thief looking to make a quick escape. He was standing there like he belonged, like this wasn't a break-in but a planned visit. And the way Audrey was looking at him, the way her body leaned slightly toward his, her lips curled into a knowing smile, made me feel like I had stepped into someone else's life. This wasn't my wife. This wasn't my home. This was something else, something dark and twisted that I had never even considered a possibility. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, forcing me to breathe in slow, measured gulps, trying to keep control of my own body. My legs felt weak, like they didn't belong to me anymore, like the ground beneath me had shifted and I was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't quite comprehend. I should have walked out. I should have turned around and left, because whatever was happening in that room wasn't something I could undo. But I didn't move. I stood there, watching, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs, waiting for the next horrifying truth to unfold in front of me. The man shifted, his muscles flexing beneath the tight black shirt he wore, his posture dripping with the kind of confidence that made my blood boil. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't worried about being caught. And why would he be? My wife was standing next to him, her arms crossed casually, her expression bored, like she was waiting for something. Like I was the one who had intruded, like I was the one who didn't belong. And that was when it hit me. The way she wasn't panicked, the way she wasn't even trying to cover up the situation, the way her lips curled slightly, as if she had expected this moment to come eventually. She wanted me to see this. The realization sent a cold shock through my body, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. This wasn't some affair she had been trying to keep hidden. This wasn't some mistake she had made and wanted to bury. This was something she had planned, something she had indulged in for long enough that she had stopped caring if I found out. I had been living in a marriage that had already ended months ago, maybe even longer. I had just been the last to know. The pieces started falling into place faster than I could process them. The late nights, the secrecy, the sudden shifts in her behavior. I had convinced myself that it was just stress, just distance that could be fixed with time, but it wasn't. She had been pulling away from me because she was giving herself to someone else. She had been disappearing for hours because she had someone waiting for her in places I had never even thought to check. And now, in the middle of my own home, I was staring at the proof of it. My breathing grew heavier, my vision narrowing as the adrenaline surged through me. I wanted to scream at her, to demand an explanation, to ask her why she had let it get this far, why she had turned into this person, why she had thrown away everything we had built together for a man who had broken into our house like it was some kind of game. But I knew better. There were no answers that would fix this. There were no words she could say that would erase what I had seen. And even if I did ask, I already knew what she would do. She would lie. She would twist it. She would make it seem like it wasn't that bad, like I was the one overreacting, like I was imagining things, but I wasn't imagining anything. The truth was right in front of me, clear as the dim light that flickered from the kitchen. And it wasn't just that she had betrayed me. It was that she didn't care. She didn't flinch when my eyes met hers. She didn't look guilty or ashamed. She looked amused. The air felt thicker, the silence stretching between us, a loaded moment that held more weight than anything I had ever experienced. I didn't know how long I stood there, how many seconds or minutes passed while I stared at the life I had built and watched it crumble into something unrecognizable. That I had thought the worst part of betrayal would be the pain, the heartbreak, the gut-wrenching feeling of knowing the person you love has given themselves to someone else. But I was wrong. The worst part was the indifference. The worst part was realizing that I didn't matter enough to her to even pretend like she regretted it, and that was when I knew this wasn't a woman who had made a mistake. This wasn't someone who had lost herself and was looking for a way back. This was someone who had already chosen a different path, someone who had been walking away from me long before I had ever noticed. She had made her decision a long time ago. And now, standing in the doorway of my own home, staring at the man who had taken my place, I realized that my decision had already been made too, that I wasn't going to fight for this, that I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into thinking there was anything left to salvage. She had already burned everything to the ground, and now, all I had to do was walk away from the ashes, the weight of it all pressed down on me as I stood in that dimly lit hallway, watching my wife and this man, the man who should have been an intruder, a stranger, stand side by side like this was just another night for them. The absurdity of it threatened to suffocate me. My wife, my partner, the woman I had loved and trusted, was standing in the middle of our living room with a man who had broken into our home, and she didn't look afraid. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even look guilty, that I felt like I had stepped into some alternate reality where nothing made sense anymore. Every instinct in my body told me to react, to shout, to demand answers, to ask how and why she had let this happen. But the more I looked at her, the more I realized something that made my stomach twist with a sick kind of clarity. She didn't care. There was no fear in her eyes. No shame. No scrambling to explain herself. That's when the pieces started snapping into place with brutal, gut-wrenching certainty. This wasn't random. This wasn't something that had just happened in the moment, something she hadn't expected. She had planned this, the late nights, the secrecy, the way she had been growing colder toward me for months. It wasn't because she was pulling away out of guilt. It was because she had already checked out, had already found someone else, had already replaced me in ways I had been too blind to see. But it wasn't just that she had cheated. It was who she had cheated with. How she had done it. Most people, when they betray their spouse, at least try to be discreet. They sneak around. They hide their messages. They come home with rehearsed excuses and avoid eye contact when they lie. But Audrey hadn't even bothered to do that. She had brought him here. She had made our home their place, turned my space into something tainted, something that had already been rotting beneath my feet before I had even realized it, and worst of all, she had let him break in. A normal person, a normal wife, would have panicked if a man had broken into her home in the middle of the night. But Audrey? She had laughed. She had smiled at him, welcomed him, stood beside him like he belonged. That was when I understood something I had been too numb to process just moments before. This wasn't the first time that I had been sleeping in that bed, in this house, completely oblivious, while she had been sneaking around with this man who had no business being here. How many nights had they done this? How many times had she slipped out of bed while I slept just rooms away? How many moments had I spent trusting her while she had been making a fool out of me? I felt my fists clench at my sides, my breathing slow and heavy as my brain struggled to catch up with the horror of it all. This man, this Clifford, or whatever his name was, wasn't just some stranger she had met by accident. He was someone she had let into our lives. Someone she had invited in while I had been too naive, too trusting to even consider that she was capable of something like this. That I wanted to confront her, to force her to admit it, to tell me the truth even though I already knew she wouldn't. She would lie. She would twist the story, pretend like it wasn't as bad as it looked, maybe even try to convince me that I was the one who was misunderstanding things. That was what hurt the most, not just the betrayal, but the way she had done it. The fact that she hadn't even tried to be careful, hadn't even feared getting caught. Because to her, it didn't matter if I found out that I wasn't important enough to her anymore to even be worth hiding the affair from. I felt something shift inside me then, something cold and final, something that told me that the marriage I had been clinging to in my mind had been gone long before tonight. That I had thought that if I ever found out Audrey had cheated, I would feel heartbreak first. I thought I would grieve, that I would feel some deep sorrow for the life we had built, for the love I thought we had. But standing there, watching her, feeling the complete and utter lack of remorse on her face, I realized something else. That I didn't love her anymore, not the way I had before, not the way I had fought to believe in us when things had started to feel distant, not the way I had told myself that she was just going through something, that we could work through whatever was happening because there was no we anymore, there hadn't been for a long time. And the worst part was, she had known that before I did. I could have walked away in that moment. I could have just turned around, packed a bag, and left. But I wasn't going to let her erase me that easily. She had already stolen so much from me: my trust, my belief in her, my faith in the person I thought she was. But she wasn't going to steal my dignity. So, instead, I stood there and memorized every second of what I was seeing, every detail, every way her body language screamed that she had already chosen him over me, that she had already rewritten her life to exclude me. I wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was, so that I would never be tempted to fall for any of her manipulations later. She had expected me to react, she had expected me to explode, to shout, to beg, to demand an explanation, but I didn't because I knew something that she hadn't realized yet: she had already lost me. I turned and walked away, not giving her the reaction she wanted, not giving her the power to twist the story into something else. Because I wasn't going to let her act like this was some misunderstanding, that I wasn't going to let her tell me some half-baked excuse about how things had just happened, or how she had felt trapped or lost in our marriage. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of thinking I still cared enough to fight, because there was nothing left to fight for. The only thing left was to make my own choice. And I knew exactly what that was going to be. I walked away from the scene in my living room with a strange sense of clarity. My body was still filled with adrenaline, my heart still pounding, but my mind had never been sharper. There was no confusion left, no doubt, no lingering hope that maybe this was all some sort of misunderstanding. I had seen everything I needed to see. I had spent too many months drowning in uncertainty, questioning myself, believing her lies, convincing myself that things could still be fixed. But now? Now I knew the truth. There was nothing left to salvage. I moved through the house, my feet feeling heavier with every step, like the weight of reality was physically pulling me down. I passed the photos on the wall, the decorations we had picked out together, the little reminders of a marriage that had already been dead long before tonight. Everything around me felt like a set for a life that no longer existed. I had been living in the ruins of something I had thought was still whole, and now I could finally see it for what it was: a lie. I reached the bedroom and stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the bed I had shared with her, the sheets that now felt tainted, the space that I had once considered safe. I had spent so many nights waiting for her to come home, lying awake wondering why things felt off, why she was always distant, always distracted. I had blamed myself for the distance, told myself that maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention, that maybe I needed to try harder. But now I knew. It had never been me. It had always been her. I grabbed a bag from the closet and started packing. I wasn't going to wait. I wasn't going to sit through another second of her lies, wasn't going to let her twist this into something it wasn't. She had already rewritten our marriage in her mind, already decided that I didn't matter enough for this to be hidden, already made it clear that she had moved on long before I had even realized there was something to move on from. I wasn't going to waste another second in this house, in this trap she had set for me. Every item I put in the bag felt like shedding another layer of the life I had believed in. Clothes, essentials, documents, everything else could stay. I didn't need it. I didn't want it. This house, this life, the version of my wife I had been holding on to, it wasn't real anymore. I wasn't going to take any part of it with me. I zipped up the bag and took one last look around the room, letting the finality of it sink in. There was no sadness anymore, no heartbreak. Just acceptance. She had taken enough from me, but she wasn't going to take my future. She had already made her choice. Now, I was making mine. I walked back through the house, past the living room where they still stood, past the man she had replaced me with, past the version of her that I no longer recognized. I didn't look at her. I didn't give her the chance to speak, to make excuses, to try and turn this into something she could control. She had already lost that power. I opened the front door, stepped out into the cold night air, and closed it behind me without hesitation. No goodbye. No last words. No looking back. Because there was nothing left for me in that house. There was nothing left for me with her. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, letting everything settle into place. The betrayal, the lies, the complete indifference she had shown me, it had all led to this moment. And now, for the first time in months, I was freed. I started the engine and drove away, leaving behind the woman who had already left me long ago. I drove without direction, without thought, just letting the road stretch out in front of me as I put more and more distance between myself and the house that no longer felt like mine. The weight in my chest wasn't grief. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was something colder, something final, something that told me I was done. The betrayal wasn't just in the fact that she had been with another man. It wasn't just the affair itself. It was how she had done it, where she had done it, and the absolute lack of remorse in her eyes when I saw her standing next to him. She had let him break into our home. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my breath steady but my body humming with tension. There was no accident in what she had done. No drunken mistake, no temporary lapse in judgment. She had built this. She had chosen this. Clifford wasn't just some affair hidden in secrecy. He was someone she had brought into my life without my knowledge. Someone who had stepped foot in my home long before I ever knew he existed. The thought made my stomach churn, my jaw clench. How many times had this happened before? How many nights had she made an excuse to stay up late, to leave for a quick errand, to grab a drink with a friend, only for him to end up in our house? Had he sat on my couch, walked through my bedroom, touched the things that belonged to me? Had she given him my space the same way she had given him herself? The realization hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't new. This wasn't something that had just happened once or twice. This had been going on for long enough that she had stopped caring about getting caught. She had planned for this. Maybe she had even wanted me to see it. Maybe she had hoped I would catch her so she wouldn't have to be the one to leave, so she could twist the story in a way that made her look like the victim. I gritted my teeth and exhaled sharply, trying to push the thoughts out of my head, but they wouldn't stop. Every single moment over the past few months played back in my mind, every small detail that I had ignored, every red flag I had dismissed. The way she had started pulling away, the way she had suddenly become secretive with her phone, the way she had always seemed so bored with me, so detached from our life together. It hadn't been stress. It hadn't been a phase. She had been waiting for the moment when I would figure it out. The most disgusting part was that she had been enjoying it. The way she had stood next to him, the way her lips had curled into that faint, knowing smirk. She had wanted me to see her with him. It wasn't just that she didn't care. It was that she wanted me to know that she had already moved on. I pulled into an empty parking lot, my breathing slow but deep, my mind still racing with every disgusting possibility. I needed a moment. I needed to process the reality of what had just happened. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, staring at my reflection in the windshield. I had spent so much time second-guessing myself, convincing myself that I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. But I wasn't. I had been right the entire time, and she had made me feel like an idiot for suspecting anything. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was that I had trusted her so completely that I had ignored my own instincts. I had given her the benefit of the doubt over and over again, even when things didn't add up, even when her lies were sloppy and obvious. And she had counted on that. She had used that against me. She had played me so well, making me believe that I was just being insecure, that I was the one reading too much into things, that I was the one causing problems where there were none. But there had been problems. And now, I was drowning in them. I leaned my head back against the seat, staring at the roof of the car, my heartbeat finally starting to slow. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her make me feel like I had lost something valuable. Because the truth was, I hadn't lost anything worth keeping. The woman I had married didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. Maybe the person I thought I knew had always been an illusion, a version of herself that she had crafted so carefully that I had fallen for it completely. Maybe this was the real her. The cold, deceitful woman who had looked me in the eye and felt nothing. That I checked my phone out of habit, knowing there wouldn't be a message from her, knowing that she wasn't going to chase after me, knowing that she had already moved on the moment I stepped out that door. And that was fine. I wasn't looking back. That I needed to think logically. Emotion wasn't going to help me anymore. I needed to move forward. That I opened my banking app and started transferring money into an account that only had my name on it. I wasn't going to let her touch a single cent more than she already had. I made a note to contact a lawyer first thing in the morning. I wasn't going to let her drag me through a long, painful process. I would make this clean, fast, final. She had already made her decision, and now I was making mine. That I didn't want closure. I didn't want an apology. I wanted out. I wasn't going to be the man who begged for answers that didn't matter. I wasn't going to be the man who let her talk her way out of what she had done. I had seen everything I needed to see. That I wasn't her fool anymore. That I took one last deep breath, turned the car back on, and pulled out of the parking lot. I had no idea where I was going, no clear destination in mind, but that didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that I wasn't going back. The road stretched ahead of me, dark and empty, as I kept driving without a destination. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the car, a constant, steady noise that filled the silence I wasn't ready to sit in. I should have felt lost, unanchored, like my life had been ripped apart in a single night. But I didn't. I felt something else. Something colder. Something that told me I wasn't broken. I was just done. There was no grief in my chest, no overwhelming sadness weighing me down. Just anger, just disgust, just the clarity that came from seeing the truth so clearly that it burned. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built my life around, had thrown it all away without hesitation. And she hadn't even tried to hide it. She had stood there, in our home, with him, looking at me like I was nothing more than an obstacle in her way. That was the part one couldn't let go of. Not the betrayal itself, not the fact that she had been with someone else, but the way she had treated me like I didn't matter at all. Like I had already been replaced. The memories started creeping in before I could stop them. The late nights when she claimed she was out with friends. The way she had started dressing differently, paying more attention to herself in ways she never had before. The way she had smiled at her phone, laughing at messages she never let me see. It had all been right in front of me. And I had been too stupid to believe in her, too blind to recognize what was happening. I had told myself she wouldn't do this to me, that she couldn't do this to me, but she had, and she had done it without remorse. That I gritted my teeth, gripping the steering wheel harder, the anger simmering beneath my skin. How long had I been nothing more than a backup plan in her life? How long had she been lying to my face while sneaking around with him? I had to stop the thoughts before they consumed me, before I let them eat away at me the way her betrayal already had. I forced myself to focus on what came next. I had left. I had walked away. I wasn't going to be that man who stayed in a marriage that had already rotted from the inside out. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into thinking there was anything left to salvage. I checked the time on the dashboard and realized I had been driving for hours, long past the point of exhaustion, but there was no way I was going back to that house. I wasn't sleeping in the same bed she had desecrated. I wasn't going to sit in a place filled with the memories of a life that had never been real. I pulled into a motel parking lot and killed the engine, staring at the flickering neon sign through the windshield. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It wasn't tainted, wasn't full of the ghosts of her deception. I checked in, took the key, and stepped into the dimly lit room. The air was stale, the bed stiff, the walls thin enough that I could hear the faint sound of a television in the next room. But it was better than being anywhere near her. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand over my face. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a split second, a pathetic, useless part of me wondered if it was her. But it wasn't. She hadn't called. She hadn't texted. She hadn't even pretended to care that I was gone, and that told me everything I needed to know, that I wasn't part of her life anymore. Maybe I hadn't been for a long time. That I clenched my jaw, unlocking my phone and scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. A lawyer. I wasn't going to let her drag this out. I wasn't going to let her make things messy, wasn't going to let her twist this into something it wasn't. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. The next morning, I was in a lawyer's office before she even had the chance to reach out. I laid everything out: her affair, the proof I had, the fact that I had already moved out. I wanted this over as fast as possible. No discussions. No reconciliation. No nonsense. The lawyer nodded, scribbling notes, asking questions that felt mechanical, detached. I answered them all, my voice steady, my decision firm. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't desperate. I was done. By the time I left the office, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the man I had been yesterday, the man who had still been holding on to something that was already gone. I wasn't the fool who had spent months questioning himself while his wife laughed at him behind his back. That I was free, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I walked out of that lawyer's office with my shoulders squared, my hands steady, and my mind clearer than it had been in months. The decision had been made. The paperwork was in motion. There was no turning back, no reconsideration, no moment where I would entertain the idea that things could have been different. She had killed that version of my life the second she let him into our home, the second she looked me in the eye and felt nothing. That I drove back to the motel, feeling a strange weight lift off me. It wasn't relief exactly, not yet. There was still anger, still bitterness, still the disgusting aftertaste of knowing I had given years of my life to someone who had never truly valued them. But there was also a finality to it now. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not her. The rest of the day blurred together. I packed up my few belongings, booked a more permanent place to stay, started cutting ties with the life I had left behind. I blocked her on everything. I didn't care if she ever reached out. I didn't care if she suddenly wanted to talk, if she wanted to explain herself, if she wanted to act like any of it had been a mistake. Because it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A deliberate, calculated, heartless choice that she had made over and over again. That I had spent so much time questioning myself, wondering if I had done something wrong, if there was a moment I had missed where things could have been saved. But the truth was, some things aren't meant to be saved. Some things rot from the inside, waiting to collapse, and by the time you realize it, there's nothing left to hold together. The first night in my new place, I sat in the quiet, drinking a beer, staring out at the city lights, and feeling something settle in my chest. Acceptance. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It wasn't peace. But it was the closest thing to freedom I had felt in a long time. That I thought about what she was doing now, about whether she had even noticed I was gone. Maybe she was with him. Maybe she was laughing, acting like none of it mattered. Maybe she thought I was shattered, that I would come crawling back, that she had broken me in a way that couldn't be undone. But she was wrong, because the truth was, she had given me the best gift she ever could. She had freed me from her. From the lies. From the weight of loving someone who didn't love me back. From the version of myself that had wasted so much time trying to fix something that had already been burned to the ground. That I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue, and let myself feel something I hadn't expected. Gratitude, not for her. Never for her, but for the fact that I wasn't stuck anymore. She had already moved on long before I ever knew the truth, and now, so had I. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not in the way that silence usually felt, but in a way that made me realize how much noise I had been living with for so long. The lies. The uncertainty. The gut-wrenching feeling of knowing something was wrong but convincing myself otherwise. The weight of loving someone who didn't love me back. It was all gone now, and in its place was something I wasn't entirely familiar with. Freedom. I hadn't heard from Audrey since I walked out. Not a text, not a call, not a weak attempt at an apology. Nothing. And if I was being honest, I hadn't expected one. That was the thing about people like her. They didn't feel guilt. They didn't look back. Once they were done using someone, once they had gotten everything they could out of them, they simply moved on without a second thought. It should have hurt. The idea that I had spent years with someone who could erase me so easily. But instead, all it did was prove me right that I spent the next few weeks putting my life back together in the only way I knew how. The divorce was already in motion, my finances were secured, and I had moved into a new apartment that didn't have a single trace of her in it. That part of my life was done, locked away like a chapter in a book I had no intention of reopening. I blocked her on every platform, erased her from my contacts, and deleted every photo, every message, every reminder of the person I had once believed in. There was no reason to hold on to any of it. She had been a ghost in my life long before I ever realized it. One night, I sat on my balcony, a beer in my hand, staring out at the city below. The air was cool, crisp, the kind of night that should have made me feel lonely. But I didn't. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I wasn't waiting. Not for answers. Not for closure. Not for her. There was nothing left to wonder about, nothing left to figure out. She had chosen him, she had chosen to bring him into my house, she had chosen to let him step into the space that had once been mine, and I had chosen to walk away. That was the difference between us. She had thrown away everything we had built together for the cheap thrill of something temporary, something meaningless. And I had chosen myself. I had chosen to cut her out like the disease she was, to take back my life before she had the chance to drain me of everything I had left. A part of me wondered if she had expected me to fight for her. If she had wanted me to break, to scream, to beg her to stay. Maybe that was why she had done it so openly, why she had let me see her standing with him without even trying to hide it. Maybe in her mind, it was a test. A way to see if I would desperately cling to her even after she had humiliated me in the worst way possible, but I hadn't given her what she wanted. I had walked away without a single word, without a single ounce of emotion. Because she didn't deserve my anger. She didn't deserve my heartbreak, and she sure as hell didn't deserve my love. I checked my phone, scrolling through my emails, making sure the legal process was moving along. It was almost too easy, the way it was all unfolding, the way I had detached myself so completely. I had thought it would hurt more. I had thought I would feel something, some kind of pull, some kind of regret. But there was nothing left to grieve. Our marriage had died long before I walked out that door. A few days later, I ran into a mutual acquaintance, one of the few people who still spoke to both of us. I hadn't planned on hearing anything about her, but the conversation naturally led there. And what they told me? It didn't shock me. She's already moved in with him, they said casually, as if they were just commenting on the weather. Didn't waste any time. Of course she didn't. I nodded, taking in the information without a hint of reaction. It was just confirmation of what I already knew. She had been with him long before I ever caught them. She had been planning her exit while still keeping me around, stringing me along until she was sure she had somewhere else to land. I should have felt angry. I should have felt something. But all I felt was pity, because I knew exactly what was going to happen next. People like her. They never changed. They never stayed. She might have thought Clifford was something new, something better, something exciting. But soon, she would get bored. Soon, the rush would fade. Soon, she would start looking for someone else, the same way she had started looking for him when she was still with me. And when that day came, he would realize exactly what I had realized. She wasn't special, she wasn't worth it, she was just a user, a liar, someone who took and took until there was nothing left. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight in my chest lift even more. I wasn't sad for her. I wasn't angry. I was just done. A week later, the divorce was finalized. The papers were signed, the marriage officially dissolved. Just like that, it was over. No drawn-out fights, no attempts at reconciliation, no last-minute pleas from her. She let it happen as easily as I did, and that told me everything. That night, I sat in my apartment with a drink in hand, staring at the empty space around me. I wasn't scared of starting over. I wasn't scared of being alone. Because the truth was, I had already been alone for a long time. The only difference now, I wasn't pretending anymore. For the first time in years, I was free. And I wasn't wasting a single second of that freedom looking back.